Before Apple became the most valuable company in the world. Before the iPhone changed how humans communicate. There was a young man who didn't fit in anywhere. Steve Jobs was born in 1955 and adopted shortly after birth. From the very beginning, he carried a deep sense of being different, a feeling that would later define his entire life. He was curious, rebellious, and allergic to authority. Traditional education bored him. Rules frustrated him. And yet, he possessed an unusual intensity, a burning desire to understand how things worked and how they could be made beautiful. Jobs enrolled at Reed College, but dropped out after just 6 months. To most people, this looked like failure. To Jobs, it was freedom. He continued attending classes he found meaningful, especially calligraphy. At the time, it seemed useless. But years later, this obsession with typography would shape Apple's elegant design philosophy and revolutionize personal computing. Steve Jobs wasn't driven by money. He was driven by meaning. He wanted to build products that sat at the intersection of technology and art. This belief separated him from everyone else in Silicon Valley, who focused purely on engineering efficiency and profit. In the 1970s, Silicon Valley was a playground for hobbyists, engineers building computers for fun. Jobs saw something different. He saw a future where computers were not just for scientists, but for ordinary people. He imagined machines that were intuitive, beautiful, and human. But Jobs lacked one thing: engineering discipline. That's when he met Steve Wozniak, a shy, brilliant engineer who could build computers from scratch. Where Jobs was visionary and demanding, Wozniak was calm and technical. Together, they formed a perfect contradiction. Jobs didn't write code. He didn't solder chips. He sold ideas. In his mind, technology wasn't about circuits, it was about experience. This mindset would become Apple's greatest weapon. Jobs was difficult, demanding, often impossible. In 1976, the idea of starting a billion-dollar company from a garage sounded ridiculous. But for Steve Jobs, limitation was fuel. Apple was born not from wealth or corporate backing, but from belief. Steve Jobs was just 21 years old. Steve Wozniak was an engineering genius with no interest in business. They had no investors, no roadmap, no safety net. All they had was a vision. A computer designed for ordinary people, not engineers. At the time, computers were massive, intimidating machines. They required technical knowledge, special environments, and expensive maintenance. Jobs saw this as a failure of imagination. He believed technology should feel personal, friendly, and empowering. The garage of Jobs' parents' house in Los Altos became Apple's first headquarters. It wasn't glamorous. It was cramped, messy, and filled with wires, circuit boards, and half-finished ideas. But it was there that Apple's core philosophy was born. Jobs pushed Wozniak to turn his hobby computer into a commercial product. Wozniak hesitated. He built machines for fun, not for money. But Jobs saw something bigger, a product people didn't even know they needed yet. They sold personal belongings to fund their first production run. Jobs sold his Volkswagen van. Wozniak sold his HP calculator. This sacrifice wasn't symbolic, it was survival. Their first product, the Apple I, was sold as a fully assembled motherboard. No keyboard, no screen, no casing. Yet it was revolutionary because it worked right out of the box. Jobs convinced a local computer store to place a bulk order, something no startup had achieved before. That moment changed everything. Jobs wasn't a traditional CEO. He didn't manage spreadsheets. He managed stories. He understood that people didn't buy technology, they bought meaning. He insisted Apple products must look different, feel different, and stand for something larger than specs. The success of Apple I funded the development of the Apple II, the product that would truly launch. By the early 1980s, Apple was no longer a scrappy startup, it was a rocket ship. The Apple II became one of the most successful personal computers of its time. Sales exploded. Revenue crossed millions. Apple went public in 1980, instantly creating hundreds of millionaires and making Steve Jobs, at just 25 years old, one of the youngest wealthy executives in America. Success came fast. And it changed everything. Steve Jobs believed Apple wasn't just a company, it was a movement. He wanted to reshape how humans interacted with technology. But as Apple grew, it also became more complex. Structure, management, and process entered a world that had been fueled by instinct and rebellion. Jobs struggled with this transition. He was brilliant, but unpredictable. Inspirational, but ruthless. He demanded perfection, often without explaining how to achieve it. Engineers described working with him as both exhilarating and exhausting. Jobs could look at a project and instantly declare it genius or trash, sometimes within minutes. This intensity created innovation. But it also created fear. Jobs believed deeply in what he called the reality distortion fear, his ability to convince others that the impossible was possible. Deadlines didn't matter. Physics didn't matter. Only belief mattered. And sometimes, it worked. But other times, it broke teams. As Apple prepared for its next breakthrough, the Macintosh, internal pressure reached dangerous levels. Jobs wanted a computer that was friendly, graphical, and elegant. Something that felt alive. Something anyone could use. To achieve this, he pushed teams relentlessly. Long nights. Brutal feedback. Unrealistic demands. Some thrived. Others burned out. Apple's board of directors began to worry. Investors wanted stability. They needed someone who could scale operations, manage people, and keep growth predictable. Jobs was a visionary, but he wasn't a manager. So Apple made a decision that would change history. They hired John Sculley, SE. In 1985, the unthinkable happened. Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, the visionary who dreamed it into existence, was pushed out of his own company. Apple had grown large, complex, and cautious. Investors wanted stability. The board wanted predictability. And Steve Jobs was none of those things. He was intense, emotional, unpredictable, and impossible to manage. The conflict between Jobs and CEO John Sculley had reached its breaking point. Sales of the Macintosh were underwhelming. Internal divisions deepened. Jobs attempted to regain control by restructuring teams and undermining leadership, but the board saw this as chaos, not passion. Behind closed doors, decisions were made. The board sided with Sculley. Steve Jobs was stripped of operational power and removed from all meaningful roles. At just 30 years old, he was effectively fired from the company he built. For Jobs, it was devastating. He later described this moment as one of the most painful experiences of his life. Apple wasn't just a job, it was his identity. Losing it felt like losing purpose, direction, and meaning. Publicly, Jobs tried to stay composed. Privately, he was broken. The media painted him as a failed prodigy. Headlines questioned his leadership, his temperament, his future. Silicon Valley whispered that Steve Jobs was finished. But something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing, Jobs reflected. He realized that success had hardened him. Ego had blinded him. Control had replaced curiosity. Being forced out gave him something he hadn't had in years, freedom. Jobs later said, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." At the time, that statement sounded impossible. But this loss stripped away his arrogance and rebuilt him as a leader, patient, thoughtful, and deeply focused on purpose rather than validation. Steve Jobs walked away from Apple with nothing but lessons. And those lessons would soon fuel one of the greatest comebacks in business history. After being forced out of Apple, Steve Jobs found himself in an unfamiliar place, on the outside. For the first time since his early 20s, he had no company to run, no product to launch, no stage to command. Silicon Valley had moved on, and many believed Jobs was a brilliant but burned-out founder, unable to work within real business structures. But Steve Jobs was not finished. He was resetting. With humility forged through failure, Jobs founded a new company in 1985 called NeXT. Unlike Apple's garage beginnings, NeXT was built with clarity and patience. Jobs poured his energy into building a computer aimed at universities and researchers, machines that were elegant, powerful, and technically advanced. But NeXT wasn't about immediate success. It was about learning how to lead properly. Jobs had changed. He listened more. He demanded excellence, but with clearer reasoning. He focused on long-term vision, not ego. NeXT computers were beautiful, but expensive.
Oh yeah, that smooths out.
Commercial success was limited.
Let's try rendering that now.
Yet behind the scenes, NeXT was building something far more valuable, an advanced operating system that would later become the foundation of modern Apple software. At the same time, Jobs made another bold move, one that nearly everyone underestimated. In 1986, he purchased a small computer graphics division from Lucasfilm. The company was renamed Pixar. At first, Pixar struggled. It burned cash. It had no clear path to profitability. Jobs invested millions to keep it alive. Again, critics questioned his judgment. But Jobs believed in people, especially Pixar's creative team. He learned a powerful lesson there. Creativity thrives when protected, not controlled. Pixar wasn't forced to chase trends. Instead, it focused on storytelling, emotion, and innovation. Jobs gave the team space, trust, and resources. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. It was a massive success. Pixar became a cultural phenomenon. Jobs went public with Pixar. After Steve Jobs left Apple, the company continued forward, but without its soul. On paper, Apple looked fine. It still had money. It still had engineers. It still had a powerful brand. But internally, something was broken. There was no clear vision. Leadership shifted from innovation to safety. Decision-making became slow. Committees replaced instinct. Products were designed to satisfy spreadsheets, not customers. Apple began releasing too many products, different models, confusing names, overlapping features. Customers didn't know what to buy. Employees didn't know what mattered. The culture changed. Risk was discouraged. Creativity was boxed in. Designers no longer led conversations, accountants did. Innovation, once Apple's heartbeat, became an afterthought. Meanwhile, competitors were moving fast. Microsoft dominated software. Windows-powered PCs flooded the market. Dell and Compaq focused on efficiency and cost. Apple, stuck in the middle, had no clear advantage. Sales dropped. Market share shrank. Losses mounted. By the mid-1990s, Apple was bleeding cash. Some analysts predicted bankruptcy within months. The media labeled Apple as a dying company, a once great innovator that lost its way. Internally, morale collapsed. Engineers felt disconnected. Teams worked on projects that never shipped. Brilliant ideas died in meetings. Apple became reactive instead of visionary. The irony was brutal. Everything Apple needed to survive already existed, but it lacked the leadership to unify it. In desperation, Apple searched for answers. New CEOs came and went. Strategies changed every year. Nothing worked. The company was shrinking, not growing. Finally, someone made a radical suggestion. Bring Steve Jobs back. At first, it sounded crazy. Jobs was seen as difficult, emotional, Dangerous. But desperation changes rules. In 1996, Apple acquired NeXT for its operating system. But bundled with NeXT was something far more valuable. Steve Jobs. Quietly, cautiously, Jobs returned to A. After Steve Jobs left Apple, the company continued forward, but without its soul. On paper, Apple looked fine. It still had money. It still had engineers. It still had a powerful brand. But internally, something was broken. There was no clear vision. Leadership shifted from innovation to safety. Decision-making became slow. Committees replaced instinct. Products were designed to satisfy spreadsheets, not customers. Apple began releasing too many products, different models, confusing names, overlapping features. Customers didn't know what to buy. Employees didn't know what mattered. The culture changed. Risk was discouraged. Creativity was boxed in. Designers no longer led conversations, accountants did. Innovation, once Apple's heartbeat, became an afterthought. Meanwhile, competitors were moving fast. Microsoft dominated software. Windows-powered PCs flooded the market. Dell and Compaq focused on efficiency and cost. Apple, stuck in the middle, had no clear advantage. Sales dropped. Market share shrank. Losses mounted. By the mid-1990s, Apple was bleeding cash. Some analysts predicted bankruptcy within months. The media labeled Apple as a dying company, a once great innovator that lost its way. Internally, morale collapsed. Engineers felt disconnected. Teams worked on projects that never shipped. Brilliant ideas died in meetings. Apple became reactive instead of visionary. The irony was brutal. Everything Apple needed to survive already existed, but it lacked the leadership to unify it. In desperation, Apple searched for answers. New CEOs came and went. Strategies changed every year. Nothing worked. The company was shrinking, not growing. Finally, someone made a radical suggestion. Bring Steve Jobs back. At first, it sounded crazy. Jobs was seen as difficult, emotional, dangerous. But desperation changes rules. In 1996, Apple acquired NeXT for its operating system. But bundled with NeXT was something far more valuable. Steve Jobs. Quietly, cautiously, Jobs returned to it. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple, he knew something critical. Apple didn't just need better products. Apple needed its identity back. For years, the company had been trying to compete by copying others, faster processors, more features, lower prices. But Apple was never meant to win that way. It was meant to stand apart. Jobs believed brands were about belief systems, not specifications. People didn't buy Apple because of speed or storage. They bought Apple because it represented creativity, rebellion, and human potential. So Jobs launched a campaign that would redefine marketing forever. Think different. The campaign didn't show products. It showed people. Albert Einstein. Martin Luther King Jr. Amelia Earhart. Pablo Picasso. People who challenged norms and reshaped the world. The message was clear. Apple is for the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the people who change things. This wasn't advertising. It was a manifesto. Internally, Think Different changed everything. Employees stopped asking, what will sell? They started asking, what would be worthy of Apple? Design became sacred again. Simplicity was treated as intelligence. Every detail mattered, from packaging to typography to sound effects. Jobs personally reviewed everything. Buttons, fonts, cables, even the way products were opened. Nothing was accidental. Apple's culture transformed from fear-driven to purpose-driven. People felt proud again. Focus returned. Teams worked toward a shared philosophy, not conflicting targets. Externally, the world noticed. Apple was no longer dying. It was interesting again. The Think Different campaign didn't just revive Apple's image, it reignited belief. Designers, artists, students, and innovators began to see Apple as their brand. And with belief came momentum. The foundation was set. Now, Apple was ready to release products that would change entire industries. After restoring Apple's identity and culture, Steve Jobs turned to what he did best, creating products that people didn't know they needed, but couldn't live without. It began with the iMac. Released in 1998, it was colorful, transparent, and simple, a computer that was friendly and fun. The iMac didn't just sell, it became a cultural icon, putting Apple back on the map and proving Jobs' vision was real. Next came the iPod in 2001, a small music player with a giant impact. At a time when people were burning CDs and carrying clunky MP3 players, Apple offered simplicity and elegance. The iPod was intuitive. The click wheel was genius. And paired with iTunes, it created an entire ecosystem that transformed the music industry. Jobs understood one key principle: control the experience, not just the device. He didn't just sell hardware, he sold an integrated lifestyle. Then, in 2007, Jobs unveiled the iPhone. The world stopped. A phone, an iPod, an internet communicator, all in one. Jobs demonstrated with poise and charisma, emphasizing simplicity, design, and user experience. Unlike other smartphones, which were cluttered with buttons and confusing menus, the iPhone was intuitive, clean, and elegant. It wasn't just a phone, it was a revolution. The iPhone created entire new industries. Developers rushed to create apps. Businesses had to rethink mobile strategy. People began consuming media in ways previously impossible. Apple was no longer just a computer company, it was a cultural force. Jobs' philosophy was clear. Design is not just what it looks like. Design is how it works. Every product had a story. Every detail mattered. Buttons, fonts, icons, packaging, nothing was incidental. These products didn't just sell. They built loyalty, passion, and a following that few companies could ever hope to achieve. By 2010, Apple introduced the iPad, further expanding the ecosystem. Jobs had crafted an entire digital lifestyle, from computers to music, phones, and tablets. His vision. Steve Jobs passed away in 2011, but his influence continues to reverberate across technology, design, and culture. The company he co-founded is no longer just a brand, it is a symbol of innovation, vision, and the power of human creativity. Jobs' legacy is not measured only in products sold or profits earned. It is measured in ideas transformed into reality. He showed the world that simplicity is genius. Design matters as much as functionality. Courage to innovate beats following the crowd. Belief in vision can overcome failure, exile, and criticism. Apple today, with its iPhone, Mac, iPad, Apple Watch, and services ecosystem, is a direct reflection of Jobs' philosophy. Every product emphasizes user experience, beauty, and integration. His principles continue to guide Apple's culture: focus, excellence, and daring to think different. Entrepreneurs, leaders, and innovators across the globe study Jobs' life, not just for his business acumen, but for his mindset. Jobs transformed failure into fuel, adversity into insight, and vision into a movement. Jobs' story is also a testament to resilience. From being fired from his own company to building Pixar, NeXT, and ultimately returning to Apple stronger than ever, Jobs demonstrated that setbacks are not endings, they are opportunities to reinvent and rise. Today, Apple's influence shapes how we work, communicate, create, and entertain. Millions of products in homes, schools, and offices echo Jobs' relentless pursuit of perfection and human-centered innovation. But the most enduring lesson is philosophical. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. Steve Jobs reminds us that success is not just about wealth or recognition. It's about impact, purpose, and leaving the world better than you found it.
Pivot the API
As Apple
integration,
continues to innovate in areas like augmented reality, AI, and renewable technologies, Jobs' vision remains alive. Every decision, every product, every Apple experience carries the DNA of a man who dared to dream bigger than any. Jobs taught us that true innovation comes from vision, courage, and relentless pursuit of excellence. From a garage startup to the world's most valuable company, his story reminds us that failure is never final, and imagination can change the world. Stay hungry, stay foolish, and keep dreaming. This is Rise Wise, bringing you the stories of those who dared to change the world.
Thank you for the watching. See you in the next video. Please like and subscribe to our channel to watch more stories.